The unexpected encounter. The stars twinkled like diamonds, scattered across the vast, dark expanse of space as Zer piloted her small, shimmering spacecraft through the galaxy. A stunning alien from the planet Luminara, Zer possessed luminescent blue skin and silver hair that flowed like liquid starlight. Her sharp violet eyes sparkled with excitement as she navigated through the nebula, a region where the fabric of space seemed thinner, allowing her to feel the pulse of cosmic magic all around her. Faster, faster, she urged herself, her voice tinged with thrill. Her ship, the Celestia, was built for exploration, but this journey was different. It was taking her into the unknown. As she maneuvered around a glowing asteroid, Zer was utterly captivated by the sights and sounds that whipped past her. However, as she approached a swirling vortex of energy, she felt an unexpected tremor in the ship. The controls flickered uncertainly, throwing her off balance. "Celestia, not now," Zer shouted, panic surging through her as the luminous energy of the vortex began to tug at her vessel, pulling it in with overwhelming force. There was a blinding flash of light, and Zer felt herself careening through a tunnel of iridescent colors. She squeezed her eyes shut, her heart racing faster than the ship as she braced for impact. With a bone-jarring crash, the Celestia broke through the atmosphere and slammed into an unexpected location, a quiet classroom on Earth. The impact startled everyone inside as the bell rang, signaling the end of a lesson. Students jumped to their feet, shrieking in surprise as Zer tumbled out amidst debris. Her radiant form stood out starkly against the dull classroom. "What in the galaxy?" a startled teacher exclaimed, clutching a stack of books to his chest. Zer glanced around, wide-eyed, absorbing the environment, desks, chairs, and blackboards covered in strange scrolls. The humans were unlike any beings she had encountered before. A mix of cautious curiosity and amusement washed over her. "Greetings. I am Zer from Luminara. Where am I?" she asked, her voice filled with spirited enthusiasm. The silence in the room was palpable as the students gawked, their mouths agape. "Ah, Earth. You've landed in geography class," the teacher stammered, clearly trying to process the situation. Intrigued by the oddity of the beings surrounding her, Zer smirked. "Interesting. Simple structure for living," she commented, adjusting her shimmering attire. A brave student raised his hand, hesitating before asking, "Are you an alien?" "Yes," Zer declared with spirited enthusiasm. "What do you do here to reproduce?" Stunned silence echoed through the room, punctuated only by muffled snickers and wide-eyed disbelief. In that moment, Zer became the center of attention, a dazzling enigma that had just begun her adventure on Earth. A curious question. The classroom buzzed with whispers as students exchanged incredulous glances and hushed laughter. Zer's curious question lingered in the air, thick with tension and surprise. "Reproduce," the teacher repeated slowly, his brain seemingly attempting to process both the alien invasion and the sudden topic brought to the fore. "Well, that's quite a personal question, don't you think?" Oblivious to the embarrassment she had stirred, Zer beamed with interest. "I'm just here to learn. You humans have such fascinating rituals." The students began to ease up, their initial shock replaced by curiosity. They crowded closer, eager to hear more from this alien being with luminescent skin and undeniable charm. Jake, a biology teacher in his late 20s, stood frozen at the front of the class. Quick-witted but introverted, he was as fascinated as he was apprehensive. Finally, he stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Zer, let's maybe take this to a more private setting." "Fantastic," Zer exclaimed, her voice bright as she gestured for everyone to come along. Instead of guiding her to his office, Jake found himself at a local coffee shop, surrounded by the scent of roasted beans and the chatter of patrons. The bewildered students trailed along, smartphones drawn, documenting the moment for their social media. "So, Earthlings," Zer began with earnest excitement, "how do you reproduce?" The barista nearly dropped a latte as he overheard the question, and Jake's face flushed. Let's talk about something else first, shall we? Like, what do you like about Earth? Zer tilted her head, her silver hair glimmering in the bright cafe lights. I find everything intriguing. The air is thick with emotion. I have never sensed so many feelings before. Jake exchanged glances with his friends, unsure whether to laugh or sympathize. Maybe we can talk about human culture, music, art, things like that. Zer puffed her cheeks in frustration. Why do you avoid the topic? Is it a secret family ritual? Not exactly, Jake stammered, scratching the back of his neck. It's just a bit complicated. Zer's eyes narrowed, playful determination shining through. I want to understand humans, their pleasures and pains. I need to know, show me. A flurry of discussions erupted around them as they took on their roles. Jake found himself both intimidated and entranced by Zer's genuine eagerness to learn. That's when the idea of role-playing struck him. That's it. We could try role-playing to figure it out, Jake suggested, though his voice carried a hint of nervous laughter. Zer's enthusiasm was infectious. Would it not be fun? Jake hesitated, caught off guard by her provocative approach. It was both charming and absurd. Well, how about we start with dating? That's a foundational part of human reproduction, right? Yes, let's simulate it. Zer's excitement reached new heights. What do I wear? What do I say? Jake chuckled. I don't think you need to. Okay, let's plan out a scenario. He pulled out a notepad, scribbling down ideas as his mind raced. We could try a restaurant date, get to know each other, maybe talk about interests, Jake suggested, feeling more comfortable as the plan took shape. Zer nodded, her expression mirroring genuine investment. And then do we kiss? Isn't that part of the ritual? Jake spluttered, nearly spilling his coffee. Oh, only if it feels right, I guess. Right, she exclaimed, her excitement palpable. We'll create a connection. The first date. After a lot of planning and enthusiastic role-playing, Jake and Zer sat across from each other in a cozy cafe. Zer was dressed in a subtle yet alluring ensemble pulled from the local thrift store. The evening was set for a first date, and the cafe they chose buzzed with laughter and music. Let's begin, Zer declared, her confidence apparent as they entered the restaurant. Jake wrestled with the nervous knot in his stomach as he motioned for a seat. As they settled, he could hardly focus on anything other than how stunning Zer seemed. She was radiant, drawing attention even in a simple dress. Tell me about yourself, Jake, Zer said, her voice melodic and laced with genuine curiosity. Well, I teach biology, he stammered, trying to keep it light. It's mostly about the science of life and organisms. I've always loved nature and exploring how things work. I want to learn about Earth's reproductive systems, she emphasized, leaning closer, her eyes locked onto his. Like, how do your kind connect? Jake could barely speak, transfixed by her presence. Well, people go on dates to get to know one another better, and sometimes they pursue intimacy if they want to. Intimacy, Zer repeated, jotting down notes fervently. Is it like a deep connection? Kind of, Jake replied, his voice gaining steadiness. It involves trust and sharing yourself with someone. Zer remained keenly engaged. So, what's the next step? Touching, Jake said, his voice soft. Touching can be part of it, if you both consent. Consent. Zer's brows furrowed in confusion. What is that? Consent is when both people agree to something, Jake explained, blushing slightly. It's important to respect boundaries and comfort levels. Boundaries, Zer echoed, making another note. I will write that down. As Zer absorbed the social intricacies, Jake felt himself opening up. He found delight in her inquisitiveness, and the prospect of their experiment unnerved but thrilled him. The karaoke night. After a few weeks of engagement with Earth's dynamics, Zer enthusiastically decided it was time for their most anticipated dating experiment, She pulled Jake eagerly down an eclectic street studded with neon lights, the hum of nightlife electrifying the air around them. "Where are we going?" he shouted over the din, laughter, and music swirling together in a captivating cacophony. "To a karaoke bar," she proclaimed, her bright eyes shimmering. "It's a perfect place for expressions of excitement and emotion." "You are amazing, Jake," Zoe praised, her smile radiant. "Your voice resonates with such raw emotion. I could feel it deep within my core." Jake blushed, brushing off the compliment. "I'm just glad I didn't embarrass myself too much." "Embarrassment is part of the human experience, is it not?" Zoe mused. "I think it makes you more relatable, more real." Jake nodded, a soft smile tugging at his lips. "You're right, Zoe. It's all part of the journey." As the night wore on, they continued to explore different aspects of human dating rituals, dancing, sharing stories, and even daring each other to try strange foods. The night was filled with laughter and a growing connection between the two. By the time they left the karaoke bar, Zoe and Jake had formed a bond that transcended their initial experiment. The lines between the role play and reality blurred, and Jake couldn't help but wonder if their connection was more than just an educational experience for Zoe. As they walked side by side under the city lights, Jake glanced at Zoe, her ethereal presence glowing softly in the night. For the first time, he felt a pang of uncertainty, a mix of excitement and fear about what this connection might mean for both of them. The unveiling of the plan. The alien woman, now named Kayla, sat in the small, dimly lit cabin of the human ship. Her sharp eyes traced the patterns in the metal walls as she tried to make sense of the events that had unfolded. For years, she had lived in fear, enslaved and isolated, until the human, Captain Reynolds, had stormed into her life and changed everything. But now, as the ship hummed with activity around her, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The door to the cabin slid open with a soft hiss, and Reynolds stepped inside. His usually confident demeanor was slightly tempered by a look of concern. "Kayla," he began, taking a seat across from her, "I've been thinking about our next move." Kayla tilted her head, her dark hair cascading over her shoulder. "What do you mean?" "We can't just keep running. The syndicate won't stop until they find us. They have resources, and they're relentless. If we want to truly free you, and others like you, we need to strike at the heart of the problem." Kayla's eyes widened slightly. "You want to fight them?" Reynolds nodded. "It's the only way. We can't hide forever, and I won't let them continue to enslave your people. But we can't do it alone. We'll need allies, people who are willing to stand up against the syndicate." Kayla's mind raced. The idea of fighting back, of taking control of her own fate, was both terrifying and exhilarating. She had spent so long in the shadows, avoiding conflict, that the thought of confronting her oppressors head-on was almost unimaginable. But with Reynolds by her side, she felt a spark of hope she hadn't known in years. "Where do we start?" she asked, her voice steady. Reynolds leaned back, his gaze thoughtful. "There's a group of rebels on the outer rim of the galaxy. They've been fighting the syndicate for years, but they're scattered, disorganized. If we can unite them, give them a common cause, we might stand a chance." Kayla's brow furrowed. "How do we find them?" "I have a contact, a former syndicate operative who defected to the rebel cause. He knows where they are, how to reach them, but it won't be easy. The syndicate will be watching every move we make." Kayla nodded slowly, the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said quietly. "I don't want to live in fear anymore. I want to help free my people." Reynolds gave her a small, encouraging smile. "We'll do this together, Kayla. You're not alone in this fight." As they began to plan their next steps, Kayla couldn't help but feel a growing sense of resolve. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't just surviving, she was fighting for something greater than herself, and with Reynolds by her side, she believed they might just succeed. The ship's engines rolled to life as they set a course for the outer rim, leaving the safety of the known galaxy behind. The journey ahead was fraught with danger, but Kayla was ready. She was no longer the frightened, helpless slave she had once been. She was a warrior, and she would see this fight through to the end. As the stars streaked past the viewport, Kayla allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The path they were on was uncertain, but it was a path of her choosing. And for the first time in her life, she felt truly free. A dangerous alliance. The ship glided through the vast expanse of space, its destination set for the outer rim, where the remnants of the rebel forces lay scattered across distant star systems. Captain Reynolds and Kayla knew that reaching them would be perilous, but it was the only hope they had of mounting a resistance against the Syndicate. As they approached the rendezvous point, a desolate moon orbiting a gas giant, Kayla's anxiety grew. She had heard stories of the rebels, fearsome fighters who had lost everything to the Syndicate and were willing to do whatever it took to bring them down. But she also knew they were desperate, mistrustful, and wary of outsiders. Gaining their trust would be a challenge. Reynolds, sensing her unease, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll be fine, Kayla. I've dealt with people like this before. They may be tough, but they're not unreasonable. They'll listen if we give them a good enough reason." Kayla nodded, though her heart still raced. She had come this far. There was no turning back now. As they descended toward the moon's surface, Reynolds activated the ship's cloaking device, ensuring they wouldn't be detected by any Syndicate patrols that might be in the area. The landscape below was barren, with jagged rocks and deep craters stretching as far as the eye could see. It was a harsh, unforgiving place, a fitting hideout for those who had nothing left to lose. The ship touched down in a secluded canyon, hidden from view by the towering cliffs that surrounded it. Reynolds powered down the engines and turned to Kayla. "Stay close. Let me do the talking at first. These people don't trust easily, but they respect strength. If we show them we're serious, they'll come around." Kayla swallowed hard, but nodded in agreement. Together, they exited the ship, the cold air biting at their skin as they stepped onto the rocky ground. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of their footsteps as they made their way toward a nearby cave entrance, where Reynolds' contact was waiting. Inside the cave, the air was damp and stale, the darkness pierced only by the faint glow of bioluminescent fungi clinging to the walls. As they ventured deeper, a group of figures emerged from the shadows, their faces obscured by hoods and masks. One of them stepped forward, a tall, imposing man with a scar running down the side of his face, his eyes, cold and calculating, locked onto Reynolds. "You're late," the man growled, his voice echoing through the cavern. "I was starting to think you weren't coming." Reynolds remained calm, his expression unreadable. "Had to shake off a few Syndicate ships on the way here. They're getting more aggressive." The man nodded, his gaze shifting to Kayla. "And who's this?" "Another runaway." Reynolds stepped slightly in front of her, his tone firm. "This is Kayla. She's the reason we're here." The man raised an eyebrow, his interest piqued. "Go on." Reynolds took a deep breath. Kayla was a slave, captured and sold by the Syndicate. But she's more than just a victim. She's the key to bringing them down. She knows their operations, their weaknesses. With her help, we can unite the rebels and strike where it hurts the most. The man studied Kayla for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he turned to his companions and nodded. "Bring her to the council. If what you say is true, we'll listen. But if this is a trap, you'll both die where you stand." Kayla felt a chill run down her spine, but she steeled herself. She had made her choice, and there was no backing down now. They were led deeper into the cave, through winding tunnels that seemed to stretch on forever. Finally, they arrived in a large chamber, where a group of rebel leaders sat around a stone table. The air was thick with tension as they took their seats, the weight of what was to come hanging heavily over them. Reynolds spoke first, laying out their plan in detail. He explained how Kayla's knowledge of the Syndicate's operations could give them the advantage they needed, how they could coordinate strikes on key targets, and how, with enough support, they could overthrow their oppressors once and for all. The rebels listened in silence, their expressions grim. When Reynolds finished, the room was quiet, the only sound the faint drip of water from the cave ceiling. Finally, the leader of the rebels, an older woman with a hardened face and a voice that commanded respect, spoke. "This is a bold plan, Captain, but it's also risky. We've lost so many already. What makes you think we won't just be throwing more lives away?" Kayla leaned forward, her voice steady and filled with conviction. "Because I've seen what they do. I've lived it, and I refuse to let them continue to destroy lives. We can't hide forever. If we don't fight back now, they'll just keep coming. But if we stand together, we can make a difference. We can win." The room was silent once more as the rebel leaders exchanged glances. The old woman's eyes softened slightly as she looked at Kayla, seeing not just a former slave, but a symbol of hope, of strength. "We'll take a vote," the leader finally said. "But know this, Kayla, if we agree to this plan, there's no turning back. We fight to the end, or we die trying." Kayla nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "I understand." One by one, the rebel leaders cast their votes, their faces stern and unyielding. As the final vote was cast, the leader turned to Reynolds and Kayla, a sullen expression on her face. "The council has decided," she said, her voice firm. "We will fight." A wave of relief and determination washed over Kayla. The path ahead would be dangerous, but for the first time, she truly believed they had a chance. Together, they would stand against the syndicate, and they would not back down. As they left the council chamber, Reynolds gave Kayla a reassuring nod. "You did good in there," he said quietly. "We're one step closer to bringing them down." Kayla managed a small smile, though the weight of the responsibility they had just taken on was heavy on her mind. The fight was just beginning, and the stakes had never been higher. But she was ready. They all were. The final stand. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation and planning. The rebels, now united under a common cause, worked tirelessly to ready themselves for the battle ahead. Kayla, once a mere pawn in the syndicate's cruel game, had become a symbol of their resistance, a beacon of hope for those who had lost everything to the syndicate's tyranny. Captain Reynolds and Kayla spent every waking moment strategizing with the rebel leaders, using her insider knowledge to identify the syndicate's most vulnerable targets. They knew that their chances of success hinged on a coordinated, decisive strike, one that would cripple the syndicate's power and send a message to the galaxy that they were no longer invincible. The plan was simple but audacious. They would launch simultaneous attacks on the syndicate's main communication hubs, cutting off their ability to coordinate their forces. With their network in disarray, the rebels would then strike at key military installations, weakening the syndicate's grip on the outer rim. It was a high-risk operation, but it was their best shot at turning the tide. The night before the attack, the rebel camp was eerily quiet. Soldiers checked their weapons, pilots ran final diagnostics on their ships, and everyone prepared for what could be their last battle. Kayla sat alone near the edge of the camp, staring up at the stars, her mind racing with thoughts of what was to come. Reynolds found her there, his expression somber. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be rough." Kayla shook her head. "I can't sleep. There's too much at stake. What if we fail?" Reynolds sat down beside her, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Failure is always a possibility, Kayla. But so is success. You've given these people something to believe in. That's more than most ever do." Kayla sighed, the weight of her responsibility pressing down on her. "I just want it to be worth it. I don't want any more innocent people to suffer because of me." Reynolds turned to her, his voice gentle but firm. "You're not responsible for what the syndicate has done. They made their choices, and now we're making ours. Whatever happens, you've done more than anyone could have asked." Kayla nodded, though the anxiety still gnawed at her. She knew he was right, but the fear of what lay ahead was hard to shake. The next morning, the rebels gathered for a final briefing. The tension in the air was palpable as the leaders outlined the details of the mission. Kayla and Reynolds would lead the team attacking the primary communication hub, while other groups targeted the secondary hubs and military installations. As they prepared to depart, Kayla looked around at the faces of the people who had become her comrades, her friends. These were people who had lost everything to the syndicate: families, homes, entire worlds. And yet, here they were, ready to fight for a future they could scarcely imagine. Reynolds placed a hand on her shoulder, drawing her attention back to the task at hand. "Let's make sure they didn't sacrifice everything for nothing." Kayla nodded, her resolve hardening. "Let's do this." The assault began with precision and fury. The rebels struck quickly, catching the syndicate off guard. Kayla and Reynolds led the charge into the primary communication hub, fighting their way through the syndicate's defenses with ruthless efficiency. The corridors echoed with the sounds of blaster fire and the shouts of soldiers as the rebels pushed deeper into the facility. Kayla's heart pounded in her chest as they reached the central control room. This was the nerve center of the syndicate's operations, a vast chamber filled with consoles, screens, and holographic displays. If they could take it out, the syndicate would be blind, unable to coordinate their forces. Reynolds and Kayla fought their way to the main console, where a syndicate officer was frantically trying to lock down the system. Reynolds dispatched him with a single shot, and Kayla quickly took his place at the console, her fingers flying over the controls as she initiated the shutdown sequence. Alarms blared as the system began to power down, the screens flickering and going dark one by one. Kayla's breath caught in her throat as she watched the syndicate's communication network crumble before her eyes. They had done it. They had struck a critical blow. But the victory was short-lived. As the last screen went dark, a new alarm sounded, a deeper, more ominous tone that sent a chill down Kayla's spine. Reynolds' eyes widened in alarm as he realized what it meant. "It's a failsafe," he shouted over the din. "They're going to blow the facility." Kayla's heart skipped a beat. "We have to get out of here now." They sprinted for the exit, the floor shaking beneath them as the syndicate's self-destruct sequence activated. The walls buckled, and debris rained down from the ceiling as they raced through the collapsing facility. Every second felt like an eternity as they fought to reach the surface before the entire complex went up in flames. They burst out of the entrance just as the ground beneath them erupted in a massive explosion. The shockwave sent them sprawling, but they scrambled to their feet and kept running, putting as much distance between themselves and the blast as possible. Finally, they reached the safety of a nearby ridge, where they collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. Behind them, the communication hub was nothing but a smoldering ruin, the flames lighting up the night sky. Kayla's heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of relief and disbelief flooding her mind. They had done it. The syndicate's network was down, and the rebels had struck a decisive blow. But at what cost? As she lay there, staring up at the stars, she thought of all the lives that had been lost, all the sacrifices that had been made. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, Kayla truly believed they had a chance. Reynolds sat up beside her, a grim smile on his face. "We did it, Kayla. We hit them where it hurts." Kayla nodded, her exhaustion overwhelming. "But the war isn't over. The syndicate will come after us with everything they've got." Reynolds' expression grew serious. "We'll be ready. We've shown them that we're not afraid, that we won't back down. And as long as we stand together, we have a fighting chance." Kayla took a deep breath, letting his words sink in. The road ahead would be long and perilous, but she wasn't alone. She had found a new family, a new purpose, and together they would continue the fight. As the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, Kayla rose to her feet, her determination renewed. The syndicate had underestimated them, but that would be their downfall. She and the rebels would not stop until the galaxy was free from their tyranny. The final battle was yet to come, but Kayla was ready. Whatever the future held, she would face it head-on, with the same strength and resilience that had brought her this far. And in the end, she would make sure that every sacrifice, every loss, was not in vain. Together, they would forge a new future, one where freedom, justice, and hope would prevail.